Who brings a stick to a space battle? The captain on the bridge of the Zarul warship choked on his words as he squinted at the incoming fleet. There, nestled in Earth's defensive grid, were hundreds of metal rods. Nothing like the sleek vessels of the Galactic Alliance. No shields, no plasma cannons, not a single turret in sight, just crude metallic rods floating in orbit, silent and unmoving. "It's an insult," muttered one of the bridge officers. "They think they can hold us off with that?" Captain Ewer grunted, though he couldn't shake an unease gnawing at him. Humanity had proven time and time again to be surprisingly resilient, even clever in a backwards, brute force sort of way. But as the captain watched the rods drift lazily in Earth's orbit, he let his confidence rise once more. This defense was nothing more than desperation. "This will be the shortest siege in galactic history," he laughed, and his officers joined him, their laughter bouncing off the walls of the bridge. Out in space, the human rods still drifted aimlessly. A few Zarul scouts had flown in close to scan the strange objects but found nothing dangerous. No thermal signatures, no energy cores, no defense mechanisms of any kind. They were hollowed-out shells, simple constructs that barely even qualified as ships. In all his years as a captain, Ewer had never seen such an absurd attempt at a defense. The fleet moved in formations, tightening as the warships approached the debris-ridden edge of Earth's orbit. Each vessel glided silently, flanked by fighters poised for an easy slaughter. But as they closed the distance, something peculiar happened. One by one, the floating rods began to shimmer. Faint blue lights flickered on their surfaces. The captain's expression changed from smug confidence to alarm as a wave of energy signatures flared across his sensors. These rods weren't just empty shells. They were projectiles, and they were charging up. "Full shields! Defensive maneuvers now!" Captain Ewer barked, his earlier confidence now shredded. His orders came too late. The rods, still spinning in the darkness, each released a sudden, staggering burst of energy that shot out in all directions. It was a chaotic energy, primitive in some ways, but it hit the fleet with the force of a cosmic sledgehammer. Ships that had once seemed impervious now sparked and sputtered under the raw power slamming into them. "That wasn't plasma," gasped the weapons officer as his screen flickered. "What kind of weapon is that?" "Primitive," the captain spat, though there was panic in his voice. "It's something raw, just enough to throw us off balance. These humans can't have perfected it. It's brute force, ineffective." Just as he said this, a second wave of rods shot toward them, launched from Earth's surface below. Faster this time, streaking with speed that even the Zarul scanners struggled to keep up with. These were not the awkward, lumbering rods of the first wave, but sharp, accelerated bolts tipped with a material that absorbed their energy signatures. They were silent, invisible blips in the cosmos until the very last second, at which point they hurtled through Zarul shields, tearing through hulls and igniting the atmosphere within each ship. One Zarul vessel exploded, then another. Captain Ewer stared at his screens, where once proud warships were now tumbling through space, spilling metal and fire. This wasn't a defense. It was a relentless, calculated attack, and he had walked his fleet straight into it. He activated the emergency comms linked to the flagship. "Retreat! We need to reassess." But the answer from the flagship's commander was nearly drowned out by static and shouts of chaos in the background. "Negative, Captain. Your human ground defenses have us locked. They've set up a field that's interfering with our thrusters and the gravity. They're manipulating gravity up here." As the captain tried to make sense of it, he watched another rod streak past his viewport, accelerating as if fueled by the very void itself. It hit the flagship's side, slicing through it like paper, a clean, efficient cut. Ewer had heard whispers of human technology, of their crude yet strangely effective methods for harnessing energy, but he'd never imagined they could be this ruthless. The humans hadn't bothered with showy laser displays or grand, theatrical weaponry. No, they were using their knowledge of physics, of energy transfer, of gravitational manipulation. And they'd crafted a tactic so blunt and horrifyingly simple that the Zarul, with all their advanced tech, were utterly unprepared. "Humans have always been unpredictable," came the voice of his lieutenant. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but this. Captain Ewer turned, hearing fear in the lieutenant's tone. For the first time, he noticed how young the officer looked, how unprepared he was for the merciless strategy they were now facing. Earth was no longer just a backward planet, to the edge of the galaxy. It was a death trap, and every passing second drew them further into its clutches. "No, we can still regroup," Yor said, though his words lacked conviction. "They can't sustain this. They lack the resources." There, his voice trailed off as he glanced back at the view screen, where the rods were still drifting, and seemingly endless supply of crude, effective weapons. Then, the human spoke. A crackling transmission cut through the noise on his bridge, echoing through the hull of his ship. It was a human voice, calm, unshaken. "We warned you. We gave you chance after chance to leave us be, but you didn't listen." The Zarul officers fell silent, each one turning to the bridge speakers, transfixed by the sound. There was something disquieting about the calmness, the almost casual tone in the human's voice. "We don't need grand fleets," the voice continued. "We don't need a show of force. All we need is enough of these rods to remind you, enough to make sure you remember this day. This is your last chance. Turn back, or every one of you will face Earth's wrath." Captain Yor could hardly process the words, his mind racing. The Galactic Alliance had laughed off Earth's warnings, ignored their pleas for peace, scoffed at their requests for respect. And now, the humans had finally had enough. With an agonizing groan, the flagship's engine sputtered, then exploded, sending a shockwave rippling through the Zarul fleet. One by one, the scattered remnants of their once mighty ships were torn apart by the gravitational anomalies the humans had triggered in orbit, twisted and shattered by forces they barely understood. As his ship rocked violently, Captain Yor clutched his console, unable to ignore the terror that now gripped him. The humans weren't fighting with pride or ego. This was vengeance, simple, unyielding payback. And it was delivered with a cold finality that left no room for negotiation or retreat. The captain knew, as his ship's hull groaned under the pressure of Earth's invisible grip, that he would not survive to tell the tale. No one would ever forget this day, the day humanity snapped. Captain Yor struggled to stay upright as the bridge shook with the relentless impact of Earth's improvised weaponry. The humans had transformed the battlefield into a nightmare, one that no Zarul officer had prepared for. Each attempt to stabilize the ship brought a fresh wave of alarms and damage reports across every console. The crew's once confident expressions had crumbled into dread. Yor could feel it too. The humans weren't fighting for victory or honor. They were simply making an example of the invaders. "This can't be happening," whispered one of his lieutenants, staring wide-eyed at the scenes unfolding on the monitors. Debris filled the void outside, chunks of what had been the fleet's strongest warships now spinning uncontrollably through space, lit by the dim glow of Earth below. Yet amidst the wreckage, those rods, those crude, vicious weapons, continued to slice through what remained of the Zarul fleet. "What are we supposed to do, Captain?" the weapons officer asked, clutching his console. His voice was desperate, cracking under the pressure that threatened to snap every nerve in his body. Captain Yor gritted his teeth, forcing his own panic down. "We hold position. They'll run out of ammunition soon. They have to." But even as he said it, he couldn't ignore the unease in his gut. These humans had planned this. Every one of those rods had been positioned with precision, each a silent sentinel lying in wait. They hadn't launched blindly. They'd waited until the Zarul fleet was deep enough within their trap to make escape impossible. The transmission from Earth's surface cut through the bridge again, that same calm, unshaken voice filling the tense silence. "Your fleet has two options. Leave our system immediately or face complete destruction. We are done with warnings." Yor slammed his fist against the console. "Enough," he shouted, though the human voice continued on, disregarding his fury. It was as if they knew that their words were the final authority here, as if they understood that no amount of Zarul pride would alter the grim situation. "Humans may not have your technology," the voice continued, "but we've spent lifetimes mastering resilience, adapting to the worst our world can throw at us. You came here thinking we'd cower." A pause hung over the transmission, each second heavy with unspoken consequence. "But now you're seeing what happens when you push us too far." The transmission clicked off, leaving a silence that pressed down on the bridge. Yor could feel the weight of the words lingering like an unseen hand gripping his throat. "Sir," the tactical officer interrupted, his voice low, almost afraid. "We're picking up a massive energy buildup on the planet's surface. It's targeting our coordinates." Captain Yor's eyes widened. "How are they doing this?" He couldn't fathom how such an undeveloped species could generate enough energy to challenge an entire fleet. "They're improvising, Captain," the weapons officer said, barely more than a whisper. They're using their own planet as a weapon. Before Ewer could respond, another shockwave tore through the ship, and the view screen lit up as a blinding beam shot from Earth's surface. The beam wasn't a focused energy weapon like those used by the Zarul, but rather a massive pulsating column of charged particles that ripped through the nearest cruiser, reducing it to molten fragments in seconds. That's impossible, Ewer shouted, clinging to his console as his mind raced to process what he'd seen. They're using the planet's magnetic field to amplify the blast. He couldn't help but feel a sliver of admiration, grudging as it was. The humans had taken their limited resources and crafted a weapon that turned their very environment against the fleet. The tactical officer leaned toward Ewer, his face pale. Sir, we have to pull back. At this rate, there'll be nothing left of us. Retreat is not an option, Ewer growled, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words anymore. Every instinct screamed to abandon the assault, but Zarul doctrine did not allow for cowardice. The Council had sent him here to break humanity's spirit, to subjugate this rebellious world and make an example of its inhabitants. But in the process, he'd stumbled into a trap that defied everything the Council had taught him about warfare. He turned to his communications officer. Send a transmission to the other captains. We need to regroup. His words were cut off by another blast, this time closer, rocking the bridge so violently that the lights flickered. The communications officer was thrown from his seat, landing hard against the wall, his console sparking as it overloaded. Damage report, Ewer shouted over the chaos. The engineering officer looked up from his console, face ashen. Shields are failing. Hull integrity at critical. We're losing life support in several sections. Just then, the bridge doors slid open, and in staggered Lieutenant Varric, one of Ewer's most seasoned officers. His uniform was stained and torn, and he struggled to catch his breath as he stumbled toward the captain's console, clutching a data tablet. Sir, Varric gasped, his voice trembling with urgency. We found something in the human transmissions. It's a message hidden in their signals. They knew we'd intercept it. What? Ewer asked, snatching the tablet from Varric's shaking hands. What does it say? Varric swallowed, clearly shaken. They call it a last warning, but it's more than that. They say if we don't turn back, they're prepared to launch an even greater assault. They call it Operation Cataclysm. A shiver ran down Ewer's spine. The humans were bluffing. Surely they couldn't have anything more devastating than what they'd already unleashed. But deep down, he couldn't be certain. Their crude ingenuity had already outmaneuvered the fleet's superior technology at every turn. He stared at the tablet, the words of the hidden message burning into his mind. This is your last chance. Leave or face the end. Ewer's hand hovered over the command console, his resolve crumbling under the weight of the decision before him. Would he risk complete annihilation for the sake of Zarul pride? Or would he swallow his pride and order the retreat? As he looked out at the shattered remains of his fleet, the answer became painfully clear. All ships, Ewer commanded, his voice heavy with defeat. Disengage and retreat. We're leaving this system immediately. The bridge fell silent as the crew processed the order, relief mingling with the bitter taste of humiliation. The mighty Zarul fleet had been bested, not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the unyielding spirit and brutal ingenuity of humanity. As the remnants of the fleet limped away from Earth's orbit, Captain Ewer couldn't help but glance back at the planet on the view screen. It was a world that had taken everything the galaxy had thrown at it and survived. And now, it had become a force to be reckoned with. For the first time in his career, Captain Ewer felt truly afraid.